right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Anthea Hargreaves and I am Bicycle Network's General Manager of Public Affairs and Marketing. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, Learning from London, How Active Travel Can Drive Lockdown Recovery. We're so excited to have you, and we've got an amazing panel of speakers who are going to talk on a range of topics focusing on the London context and how active transport infrastructure, as I said, can lead to lockdown recovery and can help with it. Firstly, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we're all gathering in our various homes and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples or elders who are here with us today. I'm going to be your host for this evening, and I'm going to just run you through a bit about how this is going to work. So this evening you will hear from 5 speakers about how active transport infrastructure can keep our communities safe and physically distanced while driving economic recovery and stimulating jobs. Each speaker will speak for roughly 10 minutes and covering a range of topics using lessons from London. So we have Melissa Cazzato from Transport for London, Fran Graham from the London cycling campaign, Brian Deegan from Urban Movement, Tactical Urbanistas, and Stuart Outhred from RACV. We will wrap up this webinar with a Q&A, so please post your questions in the Q&A section down the bottom of your Zoom, which you'll see in the bar at the bottom. We do have nearly 200 people who have registered for this webinar and joining us. So as you can imagine, we will be curating those questions and asking them on your behalf so that we can keep it to time. But please, we encourage you to be engaged, use the chat function, use that Q&A section, and get your questions asked as the speakers are going. The webinar will also be recorded, so we will circulate that to you and post it up on Bicycle Network's website. And also, as you can see there, please feel free to share any of your thoughts on Twitter using @BicycleNetwork, _network, @VicHealth, and that hashtag #BetterNormal. Learning from London was just a little bit too long for Twitter and would eat up too many characters, so we did make it a little bit shorter. I will now throw it over to Kirsten Corbin from VicHealth just to give a quick welcome for you all.
Thanks so much, Anthea, and hello to everybody. It's fantastic to have so many people jumping online to join us for the next hour or so. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we're all based and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. The organisation I'm representing today is VicHealth. So we are based in Victoria in Australia, so one of the major states of Australia, and we are a health promotion foundation funded primarily by our state government. Our default is to work in partnership with others. So Bicycle Network is a great partner of VicHealth. We're really excited to be joining together in terms of creating today's webinar as well. VicHealth has for a long time, for more than 30 years, cared deeply about walking and about cycling. We also care a lot about equity and health equity. We, like everybody else on the call, is seeing how coronavirus is really disrupting life as we know it. We acknowledge there is huge tragedy and huge devastation for some parts of the world, but we're also trying to think really carefully about some of the positive changes that have happened, increases in walking and in cycling. We're really keen to try to think about how we can hold on to some of those and maybe propel them even further. For us, it's really important that we don't look back on this time and regret not taking up some of these opportunities or not making certain moves happen right now. So that's kind of, I guess, where we're coming from as an organisation, as a state within Australia. We'd like to say thank you to the UK guests who are really happy to kind of share with us today. We love seeing the moves that you're making and really appreciate you sharing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kirsten. And I guess that leads us into our first speaker, Melissa Cazzato from Transport for London. So just a bit of a bio on Melissa. She is the lead sponsor at Transport for London, who has been heavily involved in the shaping of Street Space for London plan, which has delivered rapid, light touch and COVID responsive infrastructure across the capital. Mel has over 10 years experience working on active travel projects with Transport for London at a London Borough and sub-regional partnership. So Melissa, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Anthea, and thanks, Kirsten, for the introduction, and thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to run you through the main elements in our street space plan, a summary of what we've delivered to date, and some of the challenges we've faced. So London's post-lockdown challenge. I'm sure we're all familiar with the context. Public transport is now running with significantly reduced capacity to allow for social distancing, and there'll be still a lot of anxiety about using it over coming months. We urgently need to reallocate more space for walking and cycling to prevent a car-based recovery. So the Mayor launched London's new street space plan in early May, and the emphasis was around a green and sustainable recovery for London. The plan has 3 key areas: space at busy hubs, which is about providing more space for pedestrians in busy areas to allow for social distancing; strategic corridors, which focuses on new cycle network in temporary materials to reduce overcrowding on public transport; and low traffic neighbourhoods. This is about reducing traffic on residential streets to create more safe and attractive space for walking and cycling. So a little more about space at busy hubs. This has been the most urgent and immediate part of the programme. We've been widening footways in areas where people can't safely social distance and overcrowding has been observed. We've done this with a mixture of temporary barriers and curbs. Over the past 3 months, TfL have delivered over 15,000 square metres of additional footway space in only 30 locations across London. So moving on to strategic corridors. We have produced a temporary strategic cycling analysis to help identify and prioritise new pop-up routes. This uses data on public transport trips that could be switched to cycling and cycle demand data pre-lockdown. As well as new cycle routes, we're also looking at lowering speed limits, new bus priority measures, and reducing traffic in central London corridors. So the next few slides is going to give you a flavour of what we've delivered so far. So these are some of our new pop-up cycling routes in Park Lane in Westminster, Euston Road and Hampstead Road in Camden. Alongside these new routes, we've also introduced 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and some new bus lanes. As you can see from the photos, we've done this with a mixture of temporary barriers, traffic cylinders and temporary curb build-outs for bus stop bypasses. So as well as these new pop-up routes, we've also been upgrading some of our old cycle routes. So these used to be just mandatory painted lanes, and we've upgraded them to include wider lanes with new light segregation, banning turns at junctions to protect key cycle movements, and also introducing new 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. This has really allowed the audience to be diversified, so we've seen more families and older people cycling, which is great to see in central London. So this one is hot off the press. We started work on this a couple of weeks ago. So this is creating traffic-free streets in the heart of central London to prepare for the return to work in September. So this is a new bus gate between Shoreditch and London Bridge in Bishopsgate. It'll operate between 7 AM and 7 PM Monday to Friday. So it'll create more space for walking and cycling and give bus priority measures in central London. So low traffic neighbourhoods, TfL control the main roads in central London and our borough partners look after the local roads. So the low traffic neighbourhoods have mainly been delivered by our borough partners. There are 176 low traffic neighbourhoods planned across London for this summer, and the pictures give you a flavour of what they will look like. So essentially it's road closures in local communities to allow for streets to play, walk and cycle. So as I mentioned before, London is made up of 33 boroughs, so we couldn't do this alone. We have to work together with a consistent approach. So we've produced guidance to ensure that a consistent approach is adopted across London. We've also dished out £30 million of funding from central government to support the work on 861 projects across all 33 London boroughs. To date, we have 162 borough schemes completed, with many more in construction. The table below gives you an idea of the breakdown of schemes, so you can see that there's a lot of school streets, low traffic neighbourhoods, and space at busy hubs, as well as cycling routes. So as well as temporary infrastructure, we are also providing a variety of supporting measures, including new cycle parking, an expansion of our cycle hire system, travel demand management and behaviour change messaging, including signage, social media campaigns and radio campaigns, as well as safe queuing systems and PPE at our busy station interchanges. So here's a snapshot of our key challenges. We're delivering quicker than we ever have with significantly less budget. Your average cycle route usually would take several years to plan and deliver, but we've had to find innovative ways to compress timescales to several months and in some cases weeks. As well as these financial constraints, we also need to balance the needs of curbside activity to ensure that we can still have servicing and loading for businesses. We also have found it quite challenging to engage with stakeholders. Usually we have a very long public consultation period, but because of the nature of these schemes, we've had to deliver them very rapidly and change the way that we get buy-in from stakeholders. So we've had to use new methods like using engaging through social media, virtual meetings, and lots more communications by post and email. So another key thing is to protect our freight network and bus network to ensure those essential journeys can still happen across the city. So in terms of our next steps, over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, we're going to do a lot of data collection and monitoring to understand how these new spaces are being used, ongoing engagement with the public and our key stakeholders. This will inform our design tweaks. So it's fair to say that the pace we are delivering, we're not going to get everything right first time. So we really want to make sure that we get that stakeholder feedback to refine what's already on street. And then with all this feedback and monitoring, it'll give us an idea of what schemes we want to make permanent in the future. So we've done a lot of these schemes using temporary traffic orders. So over the next 18 months, we need to put a plan in place to understand how and when these will get made permanent. I'm just going to leave you with a really great stat here. So since May, 46 kilometres of new or improved cycle route has been delivered or is under construction across London. By the end of the summer, Transport for London and London boroughs will have completed over 57 kilometres of new and improved cycle route.
Thanks so much, Melissa. It's great to see so much progress happening at such rapid speeds in response to, I guess, an unprecedented time and really making most of that opportunity. I will get Fran to jump on, who is our next speaker. And while she does that, I'll give you a little bio on Fran Graham from the London Cycling Campaign. So Fran has experience campaigning on issues from air pollution to food and farming. Her passion for sustainable transport led her to the London Cycling Campaign, where she now works as a campaign coordinator. Fran specialises in supporting and engaging activism networks alongside managing major projects such as the Climate Safe Streets campaign. Thanks, Fran. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, and really nice introduction. So yeah, my name's Fran. I'm the campaigns coordinator at the London Cycling Campaign. For those who don't know us, we're an organisation that's been around for just over 40 years now in London. Born out of the environmental movement, we campaign so that everyone who wants to cycle in London can, contributing to a cleaner, greener, healthier city. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the context of London before COVID hit. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about the negatives, but I do want to just reflect on the fact that London, before the crisis hit, was already dealing with multiple crises. So we already had an air pollution crisis. We had a ongoing chronic congestion problem. And we were dealing with the impacts of climate change as well. So we were already dealing with a number of crises before lockdown hit. But when lockdown was happening, as Mel said, what we saw was a massive drop-off in motor traffic. We saw a massive drop-off in public transport ridership as everyone was following the government guidance and staying at home. But what we did see is a huge number of people taking the opportunity in their daily exercise to cycle. We also saw a lot of essential workers, in a bid to avoid public transport, were starting to do their journeys into work by bike. So we saw a whole range of people who hadn't cycled in London were suddenly cycling. We were getting all this anecdotal feedback from the bike shops about people dragging in bikes covered in rust and spiders and all kinds of stuff into the bike shop and going, can you fix this up for me so I can ride? And we also had bike shops just flat out selling out of bikes. So there was this huge explosion of interest and activity around cycling during lockdown as people took the opportunity to get on their bikes, essentially. And quite early on, we set out what LCC saw as a set of recommendations that were needed from the mayor and from boroughs to be able to enable everyone to do this. So enable people who are using it for their exercise and for their essential journeys to keep doing it. And we also recognised quite early on that as we were looking to transition out of lockdown, that would be really important as well. There were a couple of options that were starting to rear their heads in terms of Londoners who did have access to cars would, see that as the obvious choice for doing their socially distanced trips. And with public transport capacity lower as well, there was just a complete reduction in the kind of options that people had. And we know that we needed the London Mayor and boroughs to be able to enable people to keep choosing cycling. But luckily we weren't the only ones who recognised this. And as Mel's just gone through, obviously the Mayor put out his street space programme. I'll rattle through these because Mel's pretty much covered them around the kind of interventions that they've been promoting. And it was really fantastic because as the cycling campaign, these are the kind of things we've been championing and working on for a very long time with TfL. So seeing them being rapidly rolled out across the city was really exciting for us. So obviously there was the low traffic neighbourhoods, there's the physically protected cycle lanes. School streets is another thing that's been happening. That's time closures at the start and end of the school day to encourage people to walk and cycle their kids to school, and the pavement widening as well. One of the things that keeps coming back out of this is the benefits of doing this. So there was the benefits of enabling transport options as we come out of lockdown, but also there's the ongoing benefits that talk to some of those crises I mentioned right at the start. So air pollution is a big problem in London. The graphic that is up at the moment is one of our London boroughs in North London called Waltham Forest, where they got a jump start on all of this stuff a couple of years ago with a chunk of funding to do a whole bunch of low traffic neighbourhoods, high streets and physically protected cycle tracks. And you can see in there the difference in the pollution, and they've done some studies with King's College London where it's come out that through doing this and through having this whole area approach to encouraging walking and cycling, they believe that they've extended the life expectancy of Waltham Forest by 7 months, which is a massive public health win. You reduce carbon emissions. So towards the end of last year, there was a lot of conversation going on in London about the climate emergency. A whole bunch of boroughs had declared climate emergencies and were working towards zero carbon by 2030, which is obviously not that far away. Transport is one of the, road transport in particular, is one of the biggest sources of carbon emissions in London. So these kind of measures that mode shift, that encourage people to walk and cycle and enable people to walk and cycle, all feeds into this reducing carbon emissions. And I just want to give a plug for our Climate Safe Streets report, which we actually wrote with Brian and Urban Movement, who's talking later. Just in terms of looking at how London as a city can get to zero carbon roads by 2030 and going through the different steps and stages that are needed to enable that. Improved social cohesion and reduced social isolation. So social isolation is a really big problem. It's a growing and significant concern for the UK. But there is lots of evidence that quieter streets that are more designed around people walking and cycling improves social cohesion. There was a landmark study back in the 1970s that looked at 3 different streets with various levels of traffic on them. The high traffic streets were ones where people didn't really know their neighbours, they didn't really interact with their street very much, and the quiet ones were where people spoke to all of their neighbours. They had all these community links. And especially coming out of the COVID crisis, coming out of lockdown, I think this is a really important thing for London at the moment. What we saw during the crisis was this massive upswell in community effort and community organising. I mean, so many streets had WhatsApp groups organising mutual aid groups as well. So what people were doing were just looking out for their neighbours, making sure that if someone was shielding, that they had access to food, groceries, medicine, you know, that people weren't getting left out. And what we want to see, especially coming out of lockdown, is that community spirit and that community cohesion continuing. The still I've got on my slide at the moment is from a video. So this is actually a filter that's gone in just around me. And over the weekend, a couple of local groups got together. So you can't see it in here, but there's a string quartet from the local area had come down and set up. We're playing in the street. The local dance group had come out and we're putting on a dance show. And you can see people just enjoying the space, having that space to talk to their neighbours, to interact with their community. It's really, really important. Supporting healthier lifestyles is also a key benefit from all of this. We know that people lead very busy, fast-paced lives. It was really interesting to see the importance that was put on exercise from the government during lockdown, and to see the number of people, particularly in London, who were taking that opportunity to get that daily exercise. The parks around me were completely heaving with people. And we know that being able to build in cycling in your day-to-day as we transition out of lockdown is one of the easiest and healthiest ways to get your daily exercise. Particularly important when 43% of adults in the UK don't get the minimum level of activity a week. So there is a big gap here, which has all the knock-on impacts of all the long-term inactivity related conditions and the strain that puts on the NHS as well. So it can all help with this. And the last one that I want to talk about in terms of benefits is the economic benefits. So TfL have put together this really useful page, and I've nicked this graphic off that, which is all about the economic benefits of investing in walking and cycling measures. It's really good. I would suggest you check it out. But the interesting thing about it is what you find is people who walk and cycle to their local shops tend to do smaller, more frequent visits, which over time leads to a bigger spending power. And what you often see is businesses disproportionately assuming that people who arrive by car are spending the most, and that's not actually the case. So there's a lot of myths around the economic benefits of investing in walking and cycling. And again, coming out of lockdown, I think this is really important. So this image here is of Soho in central London. It's a really busy restaurant, pub, bar district in central London. They are trialling at the moment what they're calling summer streets. So it's either 4 or 5 p.m. in the evening, they're cutting off a whole bunch of their streets to motor traffic. And what that's allowing the restaurants to do is take over that space and put out tables. And as they're coming out of lockdown, as they're coming out of a period where they've had no activity, they're dealing with huge financial pressures. This just gives them a bit more space to have customers. It gives customers a bit more confidence that they can go out, sit outside. It just boosts the local economy. And so we're seeing this in quite a few high streets across London. And I think it's been really important for the businesses there to be able to gear back up after lockdown. The last thing I want to talk about just before I hand over is the strength of local campaigners. So with LCC, we have a network of local activists and a local group in nearly every London borough. They are so essential to what we do. They are experts on their area. They know all the little streets. We've got the sort of bigger overview from our office in London, but actually when it comes down to whether that band turn is a good idea or not, these are the guys who know it. One of the things they've been doing, obviously, over the last couple of years is building up relationships with councils, advocating for the kind of things that we're seeing rolled out at the moment. And that campaigning work over the last couple of years has allowed us to be able to really easily reach for some of these solutions that we've been implementing, that TfL and the boroughs have been implementing at the moment, because we know what works and we know where the answers are. So they've been really instrumental in that. I mean, one of the other things that Mel mentioned was about the stakeholder engagement. They've also been really supportive of councils in terms of myth busting. So some of the myths around cycle lanes have been rearing their heads. Our local campaigners are out talking to their neighbours, talking to their local communities, helping to overcome some of this fear and uncertainty about the change. They've also been organising really nice events. This happened earlier this week. We've had a London bridge that's been closed to motor traffic because of structural problems. So there's now quite a big conversation going on about the future of this bridge. So we've got lots of really nice conversations, lots of really nice campaigning happening. And the other thing they've been doing is getting involved in lots of complementary measures for all the hard infrastructure stuff going in. So the guy standing in the middle is one of our local campaigners from Kensington, Chelsea. He works in a hospital. So during lockdown, he was working with support from Brompton to make sure that some of the staff in the hospital that he was working with had access to bikes so they could do these essential journeys. The last scheme I'll talk about is the Cycle Buddy scheme that a couple of our groups are running. So what they're doing is they're pairing experienced riders with less experienced riders, helping with the route planning, helping them know where this new infrastructure has gone in, just generally supporting them as they start their journeys back into work, back into the local places of points of interest, and generally just building up a bit of confidence, giving them someone to ride with. So we've got all these really nice schemes coming out of our local groups that are just complementing all the stuff that the boroughs and the mayor are doing. So I'll end on that point because it's a really nice point to end on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fran. As Brian gets set up, look, definitely many cities in Australia are probably a little bit further back than what we've seen in London, but there are so many similarities that we can pull from that. We have incredibly passionate local bugs and groups who know our areas better than most, and are incredibly dedicated advocates and been working on projects for a very long time. I guess we're also seeing that community engagement. Definitely where I live in Melbourne, people are looking after each other, and even greater, we're seeing people of all ages get out on bikes, dust them out of the shed. Maybe they haven't touched it for a while, but our paths and roads are packed with bike riders. Or maybe a bit earlier in stage 4, we're kind of adjusting at the moment, but no, there's definitely a lot of similarities and a lot of stuff that we can learn from you guys. So thank you so much for your time. I will introduce Brian as he gets himself to share his screen. Brian is one of the UK's leading street design engineers and was co-author of the London Cycling Design Standard. So he is from Urban Movement, sorry, I forgot to say that at the start. With a background in engineering, Brian has also led high-profile policy and planning projects. He helped develop the Transport for London's Healthy Street Check, a key tool in designing for healthy streets, and helped ensure the design quality of all projects associated with London Mayor's £1 billion Cycling and Healthy Streets program. Brian, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a national government overview on this, obviously like London's in the UK and stuff going on. And the first slide is just to show that we are doing stuff right across the UK. This is from the longest pop-up cycle lane in Manchester there. And I also wanted to mention the work of Leicester before we go on there, who've Mel's doing some pretty dramatic stuff in London and she's doing a fantastic job. But Leicester have been putting a mile a week of pop-up cycle lanes in. And what's of interest to Melbourne as well is that they've just come out of their second lockdown, and I know the Deputy Mayor's really happy to share information. I also work in another area. It's just gone into a second lockdown up in Oldham. So yeah, we're sharing your pain. Let's put it that way. So yeah, let's do a little bit of an overview of what's happening. What can government do is kind of my question. The greatest thing the government can do, some would argue there's some others, but is give us money to actually make these changes and take it seriously. So what's happened in the UK is that the national government's put up £2 billion as a package to create a new era of walking and cycling, and really to fill the gap from public transport. As you do come out of your lockdown, we're going to want people to get back to work and start going and eating out and doing all the things that we've seen. But we need to protect them. We've got to acknowledge that people are going to be very wary of public transport for a while because you'll effectively be sitting inside next to people. So the government's acknowledged that, and they really want us to make a big push on walking and cycling to replace some of those shorter trips. And in the UK, there's a huge amount of trips that are very short that people are taking in cars, and if we can switch those over now, it would be a really good time. So there's money on the table to do that. Let's put in there. There's just an example of some of the stuff we're doing and what the government said, and it's the first time in my lifetime I've heard a national government talk like this. They talked about reallocating road space away from cars, which is like a landmark moment for us, for a government to say that. It's an example in Kingston in London where if you look on that curb on the left there, the cycle track used to be on the other side of it, but now they've freed up the cycle track space for additional walking space and taken half the road space to put cyclists on there. That's the kind of thing that happens when we have this rhetoric, and this is what the government is like very overtly saying to people around the country: respond to the crisis, reallocate road space away from cars. It's a game changer, we hope. The other thing they're saying is do point closures, like so points where only people cycling and walking can pass, but cars can't get through. Cars can still get access to park in local areas and do deliveries, but they just can't run through. And this is kind of like one of the fundamentals of the low traffic neighbourhood approach. But again, the government is calling for road closures to stop cars running through areas. Again, never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. Is it too late? We'll see. Other guidance they put out is on safer public spaces. So I've just thrown a few kind of reports which might be helpful for you to look at. So this is some of the guidance of how you manage social distancing around public spaces. Those little dots you can see are like the 2 metre distance points. We see them all over the UK now on our high streets. So there's some good stuff available there. They've also helped out with legislative changes. That's kind of the other great power of the government to use the law and make changes. So they've simplified some of the traffic orders so we can do these street closures. And Fran's already shown like a much better picture than I have from the West End of London. Just people coming out there. In order to do that, we need to pass a traffic order to stop cars, and it's been really simplified and promoted by the government, we'll say. And also what they're looking for to bring outside of London is that local authorities can enforce moving traffic offences, which is a long legal thing, but it basically puts the power to actually control these streets back into the hands of local authorities. At the moment, we're kind of relying on the police, and the police services in the United Kingdom are pretty stretched. So it's difficult expecting them. So they're doing some good legislative changes. It's stuff we've been asking for years on the active travel community, but it's starting to happen now. The big thing that the government's been pushing and what we're using outside London, Mel showed the strategic cycle network analysis that they're using in London. Across the rest of the UK, we use the rapid cycleway prioritisation tool. Well, now this is a complicated thing, but you can do it yourself quite simply. All it really looks for is wherever you've got available space. So in some cases, it's like you've got 2 lanes of traffic in one direction. Okay, we can have one of those for cyclists. So it's looking for that, and it's matching that to propensity to cycle. So what trips or what origins and destinations do people really have a propensity to cycle? And we get that from our census data. So they're more likely to ride if something was accommodated along that route. Compare the two. In Manchester, we threw in like bus routes as well and potential patronage, and we've come up with like a prioritised list of priority routes. This has gone out across the whole of the UK, very similar to the London approach. And I've shown an example here, randomly chose Blackpool up in the northwest for no particular reason. But the figures down the bottom that come out of it are great. You basically got a line on the map where you know there's space. Now, arguably, you've got to take it away from cars, but there is actual physical space to put something in there. And you get a kind of predicted demand as well of how many people will cycle there if you do stuff, which will help with the planning of the routes, which is what I want to get to next, really. I'm a design engineer, so I'm kind of getting as quickly as I can towards design engineering. But yeah, what we do with that figure, we've got a predicted daily use, so that tells me how wide things need to be, tells me how I need to do the junctions, how much time I need to allocate for these cycle movements going in. So that's what we've done. We've identified, we've got the potential usage, and I can start taking it through the design process now. And I just want to show a few things on that. So the government in the UK hasn't put out any design standards on how to do temporary materials on carriageway, but they've made pretty strong statements. And there's a new national guidance that's come out on cycling, but it doesn't cover temporary stuff. So I'm going to show some alternatives. But what they have done is put out a vision document for how they see walking and cycling working in the UK. And it's got some great principles in there that I've shown there. There's a really handy infographic, really about treating cyclists seriously, treating them as if they are vehicles, don't just automatically share them with pedestrians, making a whole legitimate ruse about this. And one of the great things they're doing is saying, well, if you don't meet these principles, you don't get the money. So finally, we've got some kind of quality standard at a kind of national level coming through. So it's great throwing money at stuff, but if people are just using that to make car parts, then we're not going to dig ourselves out of the crises that Fran was mentioning. So we've got these principles, but what there isn't is a kind of on-street guide how to do the actual design. I know Transport for London are working for one. I'm looking at it. Well, we're all waiting for that to come through, and it's going to be great. I'm sure Mel's behind that. But we've done in the meantime, I've worked with the Urban Design Group in London, and we put a kind of an emergency street design manual just with a few kind of concepts. I'm not going to mention all tactical urbanism stuff because that's coming in. I'm going to stick to what I know best, which is the the kind of highway engineering. It's a concept to put out right at the start of the crisis, really, of about promoting people to do kind of pop-up cycle lanes. So really just paint a line, get something physical on it, then you're in business. You know, throw some cones, get some flexible posts, and really get cracking. And lots of people have done that. Some of them have been removed, but the majority of them that people have put in are staying, and people are starting to use them, and they've got good concepts. You know, good feedback about them. Ooh, I've already shown that one. So let's go again. But what I really want to talk about as an engineer is what do you do with the tricky bits? What happens to the tricky bits, like a transition here? If you've got a pop-up cycle lane coming towards like a pinch point, how do you kind of manage that? I think there are techniques. At the moment, people are just kind of stopping, starting lanes and cycle lanes and starting them again on the other side of the pinch. That gives no kind of warning for cyclists. If we do these pop-up lanes and there's a whole bunch of collisions, then we're probably not going to be able to do them again for a generation. So I really want to make sure people look at these kind of details. This is the concept that we put together of making cars give way as cyclists transition from that near side into kind of the centre of the lane, and some kind of signage to go with it, narrow lanes, do not overtake cyclists. All this stuff's been used in the UK, but not necessarily in this combination to support the pop-up lanes. For me, that's pretty important. What do you do at bus stops? Do you kind of build out? Here's a kind of standard detail of a bus stop border, a kind of temporary arrangement where cyclists ride up and over a kind of platform area that people are waiting on to get on and off the bus. Better than weaving out round the bus into the general traffic and potentially risking a collision. Here's one that Zikla do. There's a company in Spain, and this is one that they're putting in America, a kind of bus border, temporary, modular. You kind of slot it in there, you're good to go. The cyclists ride over it, people can get on and off the bus, and you don't have to break your pop-up cycle lane and do all that kind of risk. How do you go past the side road? Something that we really struggle with cycling in the UK. I've kind of shown a kind of bolder version here, which we can't do, but you know, I think you've got a much higher chance of getting this sort of thing done in Melbourne. So to take the little square markings that we call elephant footprints, to do a really conspicuous marking for cyclists, because the risk is of vehicles coming out or turning in across the path of cyclists and not necessarily looking out for them. So we use the boldest markings we've got, in this case tied in with a zebra crossing, so pedestrians have priority as well because it's walking and cycling stuff we're doing. And for me, that gives a really strong indication to cars to, hey, think about the bikes, think about the people walking here. They're our priority at the moment to keep them safe. There's a kind of, there you go. I did a little bit of Photoshop because I can't actually do this in the UK at the moment, but that's the sort of thing that it could look like. For me, that's a really clear way of taking some of these pop-up cycle lanes across side roads. Not sure about the legal status of that in Melbourne, but I think you're okay. Another thing we've been looking at is the kind of Danish approach to the junctions. So if we're taking a pop-up cycle lane through on the near side to a major signal junction, we've got the risk of like the hook collisions, particularly the left hook. We had a whole spate of fatalities in London, so we take it particularly seriously. We can't be feeding through cyclists into the near side and then not protecting them. This kind of Danish approach uses that kind of transition thing, making the cars give way, kind of promoting cyclists to take a more defensive position and prioritizing them as they do so to get towards the stop line. Did a little bit of a visualization. This is from the car driver's perspective. So it's very clear that they give way to something coming through from the near side. It's clear for cyclists on that near side that they need to get out of the way of that left turn only lane and transition over so they don't risk a collision. So very Danish approach. It does work well for them. Nobody can kind of see what's going on. It's not the perfect solution. Perhaps we need to look at like more radical concepts like the protected intersections, and I know there's been a few good ones done in Australia like this, so we're all learning from each other. Here's a kind of temporary version, and America have been doing, and Paris have been doing the kind of temporary style ones without actually changing the operation of the signals, but using colourful crossing markings, using again the elephant's footprints, some kind of paint to really let people know, let drivers know that the junction's changed. It's a lot smaller than it used to be, and they need to be looking out for people going in an active way. Did a kind of little visualization of there of how you could apply some kind of colourful crossing and colours and like give people some kind of safe haven when they're crossing a junction's kind of wait and have a little bit of a look. And those people are, I mean, are cyclists. Okay, and just to show you one of the things we've been doing in Manchester, this is like our new sort of protected junction approach. The Cyclops one's kind of more efficient than doing nothing. We're finding because the cyclists and the pedestrians all go on the same stage. There's a kind of longer term one, and one of the things we're getting from government is they want us to do temporary stuff, but we really have to prove that it's going to stay around and put into kind of permanent versions. So you have a temporary protected intersection, you go to a kind of full all singing, all dancing version eventually. And just to finish up on a few things to not forget, and I've been quite cycling focused, I could have talked about the walking one, but these are the things that people tend to get wrong the most. Make sure there's somewhere to actually park your bike. I mean, security bikes is one thing, and you don't want to be putting lots of bike stands in the middle of the footway. People are trying to socially distance. So what we've been doing increasingly more and more in the UK is doing cycle parking on the carriageway. Here's a kind of car-shaped bike stand. You can get 10 bikes into the space of where one car was, so that's a pretty efficient way of getting people in and out. You're parking on street, bikes are vehicles, treat them as such. So think about rolling out your cycle parking. People are going to have somewhere to leave their bike. And I'll also say something that, you know, we waited a long time to do, but it's really starting to pick up now, and the government have put quite a lot of money into this to do cycle training. Lots of people who are picking up those dusty bikes who might have ridden them for 20 years, for me, they need a little bit of training. We haven't got the greatest conditions in the world for cycling, and I know in Melbourne you get in there, but you've still got some quite tricky situations as well. So think about training people. The buddy approach that Fran was talking about is great, but there's quite a lot of trainers out there, and they'll all be looking for work. Get them going. Let's train people up to actually deal with these situations, and so they don't come a cropper. We want them to keep cycling so we can all feel the benefits. I think that's probably about enough from me. I'll stop it there.
Thank you so much, Fran. I mean, as a starting point, it's great to hear that so many of the pop-up interventions that you guys have rolled out have become permanent, and it does become a stepping stone. You know, we take this opportunity, whatever the COVID pandemic has faced us with, and, you know, that you have been able to get that active transport infrastructure with less resistance. And I know that there are a lot of people who are tuning in from local government and state government. So it's great to have you share some of those design details and examples of the work that you've been doing and the creative solutions that you guys have come up with to deal with some of those really challenging traffic interactions and situations that are, you know, that we haven't come across before. I mean, the bus stop was one that was great, but, you know, the fact that you're thinking about how to prioritize the movement of bikes and how to make sure that bike riders are protected. So I think there was a lot in that for a lot of the people who are in that kind of space here. So thank you for that. Next up, we do have the Tactical Urbanistas. So while they do get ready, a bit of an introduction for them. The Tactical Urbanistas was established in April in response to London's lockdown. My screen's just jumped, by an all-female creative collective, hoping to address the slow pace of change on active transport and public rail improvements. Since then, they have widened pavements, created renegade protected cycleways, and brightened up a number of local council Transport for London's interventions with coloured paint and talk. I will now hand it over to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for the introduction. So we're the Tactical Urbanistas, and thanks for having us. We are a group of female creatives and professionals working in the built environment. And we're just having trouble going to our next page. There we go. So we started back in April when lockdown began in London, and we sort of developed spontaneously out of frustration of not being able to do much in our jobs, and feeling a lack of rapid response and bold moves and ambition from councils. So we were seeing a lot of people crowding on narrow footways in London, and a lot of crowding in queues outside of shops. And we just wanted to help create more space for people to socially distance. And we also found with the lockdown, it really exacerbated a lot of the existing emergencies and crises that Fran mentioned earlier, and highlighted the spatial inequality in our built environment. So our first intervention was addressing this narrow footway issue by reclaiming some of the road space that's traditionally been for cars. And so we've done many interventions that reclaim the carriageway, but we also, as we developed, we started doing more work in improving existing interventions that were put in by the councils and trying to brighten those up and make them more inviting for people to use, and also improve communication and messaging around these interventions just to make people more aware of what they were actually for. And finally, we've also done some improvements in public spaces that are already car-free, just to take these underused spaces and make them more lively and inviting for people to spend time in and safely socially distance during the pandemic. So here's some pictures from our first intervention, which were outside of a grocery store. And we used paint and physical barriers to reclaim some of this really wide carriageway from cars and provide space, again, for people to stand in line outside of the shop and safely walk and cycle by. And we had really great response from public and residents and customers, and saying that this was really needed, and they really liked it, and in the bright, welcoming space. However, the council was a little bit concerned about safety issues of having the physical barriers on the carriageway. So although this was a really, really inspiring first intervention and it got a lot of positive feedback, we did learn that moving forward, it would be important to work with councils to get their buy-in to make sure that any interventions we were putting in place would be long-lasting. So when we were looking for locations to regain some carriageway, we wanted to use areas that had narrow footways, which there are a lot of those in London, that were challenging for people to socially distance and a lot of people walking by. So high streets with a lot of essential shops and local businesses where queues were likely to form. And of course, we wanted to avoid widening the footway anywhere where it would obstruct buses, emergency vehicles, loading vehicles, and of course, pedestrians and cyclists. So another reclamation of road space example is here, where we took a parking spot in a residential neighborhood in front of a bike shop. And this was a really great intervention because we were able to engage with the owner of the bike shop before putting it in place, just to understand more about the actual shop and the local neighborhood and understand their needs. And we felt that this had a lasting impact for the neighborhood. And you can see the customers there really enjoying having the space to wait outside of the busy bike shop. And a similar example here, just on a busier street, is taking space from footway parking, which is quite an issue in London. And the footway parking really takes up a lot of valuable space for pedestrians. So here, again, we engaged with the business owners on the street, especially the co-op grocery store manager, and got their support before we did this. And they were really happy to see the results, and their customers were able to safely wait outside. However, we did see after some time, vehicles started moving the physical barriers and began parking again on the footway. And this, again, just reinforces the idea that if we want any sort of permanent or lasting change, it's important to work with the council, as the co-op managers had no way to really enforce that closure.
So as lockdown sort of progressed and councils started responding to the crisis and started implementing some emergency measures and widening footways, this was being done at speed and sort of, yeah, really quickly. And we thought it was important to also highlight these interventions and make it clear to people what they're for, because change was happening so quickly, and people are so conditioned to just sticking to the sidewalk and seeing the carriageway space as space for only cars. So lots of people were hesitant to step in, and we wanted to take these spaces and sort of brighten them up a bit and make them more inviting for people to use. So these are some of the interventions we did in existing footway widening interventions. And then in addition to that, some councils had already implemented street closures for vehicles that used to use roads as through roads and create traffic in residential areas. So they added some filters, and we wanted to enhance these and sort of add some play elements with paint and make them a little bit more colorful and bright and invite people and children to use them. And this was done with a local group that was already advocating for keeping these road closures in the long run. And we found that working more with local groups that know their areas very well and know the problems and know where the need is really important, and really like enhances the value of anything we implement, because we can't possibly know where the need is and what people want by ourselves. This is an example of another intervention we did on an existing low traffic neighborhood that was put in place in Lambeth. And so the low traffic neighborhoods have a number of filters where cars aren't meant to drive through, but not all of these are in place with physical barriers that block the entire street. So there are cameras that would find drivers going through, but they're still physically open, and that's mainly for emergency vehicles. So lots of residents and drivers were a little bit confused about whether or not they can go through, and we wanted to help with highlighting that these spaces are no longer spaces for cars, but spaces for people to be able to walk in the middle of the road and cycle in the middle of the road without fear of fast-moving vehicles. And in here, we worked with a group that was already sort of advocating for the low traffic neighborhood and active in it. And it just sort of highlighted how we need to think about prioritizing these interventions, and whether we need to work with groups that are already sort of organized and vocal about what they want and know the changes they want to see, and know what their need is, rather than groups that might not necessarily know how to voice their wants, or don't know what changes they want to see on their roads. So it just highlighted this sort of equality issue and being more aware about where the real need is. And I think at a larger scale, like a council scale, these things are more important, like being able to assess the need based on data and access to green space and access to and traffic volumes, rather than where groups are already vocal enough to be able to tell you that we want some changes on our streets. And then the third sort of type of intervention we've been doing is improving existing public spaces that are sort of unloved or underused. And we found this to be also really valuable in sort of encouraging more physically distanced interaction and highlighting available public space for people to be able to use, especially during a time like lockdown, where it's, social isolation can be an issue. And what we learned is that even for simple things like this, there's always going to be someone who's going to object to a little bit of color on the sidewalk. And that's generally not representative of the opinions of like the wider population. And it's important to keep that in mind, especially in projects with bigger impact and that are more controversial. That's another example of giving some love to an underused space. And another thing that was important is prioritizing interventions according to impact and knowing how to manage requests, because we received a lot of requests from people who need help in painting areas or reviving certain areas, but that don't necessarily fit our objectives or don't really create the impact that we would like them to create. And it's important to filter these out. Another thing that was important was the signage and messaging that in the context of things being implemented really quickly, we thought was really important in sort of explaining why things are being done and what the purpose of them are and what the importance of them are, not just during lockdown, but in the sort of longer term and in the context of a air pollution and public health crisis. And it's sort of, it helps with acceptance and understanding of these interventions. And finally, some things for the future. We'd like to see councils acting bolder and faster with prioritizing people over vehicles and facilitating social distancing and seeing the value in making some of these temporary changes more permanent. As a group, we'd also like to go for more creative and bold interventions that address crossings and junction tightenings and sort of widening spaces in front of businesses that need them, we'd like to work more to support these local businesses, but also support other groups and residents who would like to do similar work in their streets, but don't necessarily know where to start, or groups that don't normally get involved or don't feel empowered to make these changes. And finally, we'd also like to see councils help residents address issues in their neighborhoods and help with providing blueprints and frameworks for this type of action. And thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Tactical Urbanistas. I mean, what a amazingly creative and proactive way to change a streetscape, you know, enhance those interventions, improve the aesthetics of public spaces to encourage people to use them and making it more appealing. I guess it's also a great way to use creative solutions to overcome people's resistance to change, which is definitely something that we see, or, you know, people's attachment to the way things were. It's fantastic. But, you know, to reiterate what you said, that permanent and lasting change does have to come from working with local governments. Up next, we do have Stuart Outhred from RACV. So he is a senior planner with the Mobility Futures team at RACV. He's an urban planner with a keen interest on how cities function and the health of people that live in them, and has experience working in Melbourne, Perth and London. With RACV's Mobility Futures public policy team, Stuart is looking into how Victoria is changing and how our world-leading livability can be enhanced. So over to you, Stuart.
Unmute. Hey, I'm the guy that did that. All right. Thank you. Firstly, thank you to Bicycle Network, Vic Health, and importantly to Luke Poland, who's pulled this whole thing together. So thanks, Luke. I think you've done it in 5 days, which is remarkable. So yeah, RACV, we've been talking about this stuff for a little while now, coming from our kind of road safety roots and turning our attention to a topic that really matters in Victoria at the moment. I'm going to talk about a little thank you to the UK for the years of work that has been done. A little snapshot of the state of play here, some local sentiment and what we think are some really key opportunities. So yeah, this is the long game that we've all been watching. This map was published in 2009. So there's been a very strong movement happening in the UK in this space, talking about streets for people riding bikes, people walking, making them safer. So this hasn't happened overnight. We love this map because it's really simple. It's got 12 lines on it. It indicates some really clear intent. It's really easy to market, and it's easy for a politician to grab this and run with it. You know, it's quite a simple ask, which is really key. So some of the progress that's been happening locally, some of the state of play here. This is a complicated slide because there's been a lot going on, which is really good. So you can see on the right all the different parties that have been busy. So the department have been flat out bringing the movement in place component of their work to life. We're really hopeful to see some great things coming out of that. The Inner Melbourne Action Plan, there's a model now for that area, which should give us a really nice indication of demand going forward for this sort of infrastructure. The Amy Gillett Foundation, of course, with the Bike Spot program and CrowdSpot helping there. The COVID response from the City of Melbourne has been quite incredible, I think. And just in the yellow in the middle there, we've put together a submission to Infrastructure Australia, which was endorsed in February this year. So we now have a bit more clarity around what we're asking for across council areas, across the boroughs, if you like. And I feel like we're getting towards something that looks a bit like that London map that has 12 lines on it, which hopefully makes this a much simpler conversation to have going forward. So really high quality protected infrastructure that does a really important job, especially in the inner sort of 10 kilometres of Melbourne. Why are we talking about protected lanes? So this is research that's, again, it's local. It's not from Amsterdam or Copenhagen. This is what Victorians think. So protected bicycle lanes give people confidence. So that's where you're likely to get many more people cycling from many different backgrounds, demographics, younger people, older people, especially more women riding a bike, which is really central to this whole thing. So the City of Melbourne, I have to have these images in here because I think the response from the Capital City Council has been quite remarkable. 40 kilometres of new bike lanes, reimagining our little streets in central Melbourne as shared zones, and a real emphasis on protected infrastructure. Also, tip of the hat to the other councils that have been busy. So Yarra, Moreland with your parklet program, and a real emphasis on walking. There's things happening, but certainly not on the scale that we've seen in London, which is, I guess, what we can all hopefully take some inspiration from today. A little picture of sentiment. So 2 polls, both very recent. So May, so during lockdown 1, which feels like a lifetime ago, but it's just a couple of months ago now. So the Amy Gillett Foundation with their YouGov poll, huge support for the installation of temporary bike lanes to support riding bikes for transport, okay? Really clear. There is an appetite in the community for this stuff. We ran a poll on our Facebook channel and got a really similar response. So whilst there might be some opposition out there, it's quite likely that that opposition is coming from a minority. And I think that's really important perspective for policymakers and decision makers. So the politicians that are hopefully listening, that there is an appetite here. So lean into it would be great. A nice little picture here from Transurban of all people today. This is published in a market update today, a piece of research. So jump online if you Google Transurban, sort of urban mobility trends, I think. They're expecting a bump in bike usage post-COVID. So it's not just the sort of hardcore bike advocates expecting this. There's a lot of very pragmatic voices out there, a lot of different voices, I should say, which are tipping a similar thing to happen. So what are the opportunities? I think in Victoria, we're at a fairly unique time where there's a huge amount of alignment across councils. We've got a state government policy which is quite pro riding a bike and walking, if you like. The advocates like ourselves, Bike Network, the Amy Gillett Foundation, We Ride, we're all pretty much on the same page with this stuff, as are Infrastructure Australia, Infrastructure Victoria. You would struggle to find an academic that disagrees with this approach. And as I've just said, the community. So there's a lot of alignment, there's a really strong tailwind, I guess, for these ideas. In terms of the global picture, it's a global pandemic, right? So the lessons are applicable right around the world. So we're well within our rights to look to other cities and say, that's fantastic, we could have that. I'm especially looking at the summer streets images of sort of downtown Soho, thinking about our high streets, which is a really important topic. Maybe we could do all of this again on that topic. I love the focus on health that's coming out of the UK, be it air pollution or physical health, you know, the population-wide health outcomes that healthy transport infrastructure can bring. I think we really need to hone that here in Victoria, in Australia. And of course, we're looking at spring, right? So spring's not far away now. We're going to start to see a lot more sunshine. We're going to get that natural uptick in bike and walking activity. Hopefully that's coupled with a bit of a recovery phase from the COVID lockdowns. And I think it's a real invitation to councils and the state and the national government to sort of be ready for that, to have things in place when the sun starts shining again. So hopefully there's a bit to talk about there. I've tried to rattle through it. Perhaps I think it's time for the Q&A. Anthea.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks for that. You know, it's clear that there's support for this kind of pop-up rapid rollout of, you know, this temporary, I don't like using the word temporary, we want to see them as permanent, but, you know, that light touch infrastructure to get people riding. From Bicycle Network's own counts, we've seen that 300% growth in paths and trails, and it's absolutely, we agree, an opportunity that we all need to grab, which is why we've probably seen such a big response. And I thank everyone who's come on today. You know, I think our challenge now is, you know, all the stuff that we're seeing out on our streets, the kids playing on bikes, people of all ages out there riding and walking. It really is a fantastic opportunity. It's something that we need to keep going. And, you know, COVID, with all of the terrible stuff that's come with it, has presented us with that opportunity. All right, so for the Q&A, I will get all of our speakers and panelists to chuck their cameras and microphones on. I will throw maybe one question each. I'm just checking the time, and I don't want to hold anyone up for any longer, but it's been absolutely riveting, and thank you so much. I'm sure there's lots of notes that have been taken. There's been lots of chat and questions, and thanks to everyone who did post in a question. I have had my people behind the scenes pulling together a question, so I will go to Mel first, because it's probably been the longest between you've spoken. Mel, one question came from Katie Dixon. So what do you feel was the top 2 things that Transport for London is doing to help the boroughs deliver the schemes that you spoke about?
As I mentioned before, obviously Transport for London manage the main roads across London, and all the local roads are managed by the borough. And I think the main thing for us, it was leading by example, being motivating and being bold. So things we're doing, reallocating road space away from parking and cars to give more space for cycling and walking in a really quick pace, has really led the way for other boroughs to follow. And as well, having a consistent temporary design guidance and sort of giving pallets of materials, so other boroughs can basically have a cohesive network with sort of a consistent approach across London. But I guess it would be being bold and being fast, so others will follow and hopefully be motivated by that.
I think that's a really good takeaway for us. Be bold. It's something that we see a little bit of resistance here. And, you know, we've seen little movements and patches that Stuart did refer to, but that be bold moment is something that we could all take. And I'm sure many of the local and state governments could use. I've got a question for Fran. So in Australia, there's been no progress on lower speed limits during COVID-19. What is your advice for how to make this a priority? And that came from Lena Hooder at 30please.org.
That's a really good question. So the state of London at the moment is we had quite a few boroughs who were 20 mile an hour already. It was mainly the outer boroughs and a couple of inner London boroughs who were still 30. In response to COVID, I think they've both, the 2 inner London boroughs who were sort of out, surrounded by 20, have both gone 20. And actually that central London, City of London area that Mel mentioned in terms of creating a really large walking cycling area is going 15 mile an hour. So there is a trend in London towards lowering the speed limit. This has actually been something that has been a long time in the works. We've got an organisation who is active in London and the UK called 20's Plenty, and they do a huge amount of work behind the scenes in terms of meeting and campaigning for lower speed limits. I think the safety component is the key thing, and that's a key message that I find that always resonates with councillors and officers when I'm talking with them about 20 mile an hour, is the damage that is caused by a crash at 20 is there. It's not great, but it's much more survivable than one at 30, and especially because we had a real problem in London during lockdown with speeding. So given that we had so fewer cars on the road, the speeds went up quite dramatically, and we were seeing, you know, 70 mile an hour on a 20 mile an hour road. It was quite a big thing, and so there was a push to lower the speed limits in order to prevent the damage and injury caused by this uptick in speeding. It's a tricky one, but it's definitely one of the complementary measures that has been pushed through in those councils that didn't have 20 mile an hour already.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a similar challenge here in Australia. We know some of us sat at the Road Safety Summit in Victoria and heard that, if we lowered speeds, we would see fatalities and, injuries caused by crashes decline. I guess I might go to Stuart just quickly on that local, as I bring it into that local context. How do you think we can make lower speeds, I guess, a priority, knowing that the science is there? It shows that it does make our streets safer, particularly in those high, foot traffic areas like local streets. How do we get that as a priority for Victoria?
Yeah, I think so. Again, City of Melbourne are sort of leading here as a Yarra, probably. So I think there's little nuggets of good things out there that deserve to be looked at, to be understood, and the trade-off to be really understood, right? So a lot of opposition to this comes from a fear that a commute or a trip will take a lot longer than it used to with a new speed limit attached to it. And we kind of know that that's not true. So we're talking seconds of delay, not hours, right? So I think understanding that is really important, sort of fully understanding what is going on with those different speed reduction trials that have been happening around the place. And I guess giving the state a bit more courage to sort of go, okay, this does have merit, to look at those facts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stuart. Brian, we have another question for you. So does having cars parked on both sides of the street cause greater problems for riders? And that came from Kevin Balam.
Well, it depends what kind of street. Like as a design engineer, the first thing you've got to ask is what context. And context is everything. So if you're talking like a residential street, then if there's cars parked on both sides, that's the most effective traffic calming technique we have, to have the actual carriageway narrowed by parked cars, and then you ride in the middle of it and it's all fine if there's hardly any cars or it's filtered, so there's some kind of closure in there. Great. Whereas if you're on like a busier road, like a trunk road, dual carriageway, and you've got cars parked on both sides and you're trying to find space to put in some segregation, and it could be a real problem. You might not have the available width to still keep 2 lanes of cars moving and still keep parking on both sides and your bus lanes and then it's like, well, what space do you give up first? Where's the hardest bit to get? Is it like sometimes it's easier to make it one way than it is to take out parking? Our old cycling commissioner in London, who's now got a national role, used to say parking's the third rail. You touch it, you die. So it's one of those things. It can be like the hardest thing to shift, but I will say during the lockdown period in London, people have been a lot more open to moving car parking away to make space. And we're saying to people, just do it temporarily. Let's give it a go. We've got the orders to put it through there, see how it works, see what the impact is on business, rather than like having a 4 or 5 year discussion that runs through the courts about moving somebody's space and then see what happens. If you give people a taste of like a decent provision by removing it, then chances are that most people want to keep it. So yeah, like all engineering questions, it's always a great big depends on the context. So yes and no.
Yeah, look, it's definitely the same resistance. Car parking is almost can't touch the car parking, don't even mention it, because you'll get all sides come at you. And yet we know that, at the moment there is this opportunity. People, there is that attachment to like that resistance to change, and people are attached to the way things used to be and what we're presented with, that now nothing is normal, and we have this amazing opportunity to change streets quickly, maybe while no one's looking, or maybe less people are using it, less disruption, and suddenly there's a new street and people are just happy to be outdoors riding and preserving some of that things that they've loved from lockdown, getting out on their bikes with their kids and families, and then coming out of lockdown and seeing that they've got that opportunity, and maybe not as much resistance to car parking when we're not using our cars so much. And I have one more question for the tactical urbanistas. So how did you go about getting the traders to agree to give up their parking outside the shops?
So we talked to the owner of the bike shop, and one of the members of the team actually lives in the area. And it seemed that it was something that residents, like the owner of the bike shop and the people around, said was okay. Like it's just one spot, and it's like, it didn't seem like a big issue to them, or it didn't seem like something that residents would mind very much. So they sort of gave the green light to go ahead and do this, and reassured us that there won't be sort of backlash from it. So yeah.
So yeah, just finding those allies. A bike shop might be a nice one if you're approaching to make some more space for bikes. I probably got a question. I'm happy to open this up to the panel, and whoever wants to jump in, and this could be a bad idea given that this is Zoom. But I guess, you talked about the interventions where you were shutting down local streets. I guess I'm interested to hear about how you overcame the resistance, or was there any resistance to shutting down those local streets? We've played with it in a couple council areas in Melbourne and had some success with parklets and other, streets that have been shut down. But I guess, how have you overcome the changes to the road closure? How have you overcome any resistance to the road closures? Anyway.
Can I go first?
No, you go first, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, just frankly, it's a question of like concentrating on what people gain from the area. When we first did the trials in Waltham Forest, and it's very hard to explain to people what difference it will make putting some closures around. So you give it a test, and then, yeah, people jumped into camps quite quickly, but the people that liked it far outweighed the people that didn't. So to a large extent, you just try these things, and certainly that's what we're doing at the moment, and people can then see the benefits and feel the benefits, and really the way we're selling it across the UK is to say we're trying to recreate those kind of lockdown conditions. And I know it was a terrible period and we're not making light of it, but people were out walking feeling safe, the kids were out playing, old people could feel safe walking around and going, well, we're just trying to recreate that. We've gotten to a point in the UK where we're back to 1950s level of motor traffic, and people liked it. And so really that's what we're selling now. We're saying, okay, the cars have come back now. We're up to 90% of the cars that were there before across most of the UK. But we're saying, look, this is what we're selling. Do you remember how your street was then when you were out riding your bike every day, when the old people were walking, when you could walk in the road feeling safe when you're passing people? We can recreate that. So I think everybody's had a little bit of a taste of that low traffic neighbourhood feel. So it's a little bit easier to convince people. But yeah, it's always going to be an issue. But again, Stuart said the same thing. You can't let the few disadvantage the many. We have to get it, and it's still better. It's definitely better for local people if you're moving rat runs. That's why I'll let Fran come in now.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add was around the importance of consultation and engagement when you're doing this kind of stuff. So we've seen quite a transformation in London about how consultation is run. So it used to be that a borough and TfL would work on a scheme and then present it to the community fully formed. And that would be the scheme that was going in, and there was very little room for tweaks and changes. And, we had a real problem in London where loads of communities just felt they'd been completely railroaded, like their wishes hadn't been taken into consideration, their input hadn't been heard, and they were just dumped with a scheme that they hadn't heard about until construction started down the road, And so there's been a real change to start really early, like even before any plans have been put down on paper about what the scheme might look like. You start engaging with that local community, you start talking to them, and you build it with them. So you ask them about their streets, the places that they know about, the places that they're intimately acquainted with, and we might not be. You ask them, what are the things you like about your area? What are the things you don't? How can we improve this? How can we make it better? And you start building up the scheme with them. The thing that we've been seeing at the moment is obviously you don't have time to do that when you're putting emergency measures in. Some of these engagement processes take like 6 to 8 to a year. They take a while if you're going to do them deeply and properly. But a lot of the street space programs have been going in incredibly fast. So the really important thing that we're trying to get across to councils and council officers at the moment is, if you're putting in a low traffic neighbourhood as an emergency measure, this is a really important and useful thing. And as Brian said, it has massive benefits for the wider community. But the thing you have to be really clear about is that it's an emergency measure, it's a trial, you're open to tweaks and changes and improvements, and the feedback process has to be there, that the community can come and talk to people about the scheme, because it has been jumped on them. The first thing a lot of people are hearing about their low traffic neighbourhood in their areas, they see the planters being put in the road. So having that space for that conversation, having that opportunity to hear feedback, constructive feedback, act on that constructive feedback is going to be really important in ensuring that a lot of these things that are going in on sort of 18-month trials can then transfer into permanent schemes later down the line.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, like bringing people along that journey. So as you said, it doesn't feel like you're dictating to them that this is the way their streets have to be when they live there. Definitely bringing them on for that journey, but then at the same time, not stopping the progress. Like we want these things to go in and try them and, you know, adapt them as we need to. So I think that's a really good point. I think that brings us to the end of our question. So I will thank everyone again so much for their time. And I will, before I just throw to Craig Richards, Bicycle Network CEO, let everyone know that we will be we did record this, and assuming that everything went well, I will get an email with a link, and we will put that up on Bicycle Network's website and share that with everyone so that you can, you know, relive these lessons, take them back to, you know, your decision makers or wherever you work, and start to like employ and maybe be inspired to try some of these ideas yourself. So Craig, I will throw it over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anthea. And I get the lucky job of just saying thank you so much to everyone. First, to our amazing speakers, a huge thank you. Down in Australia, we like nothing better than to show the English how it's done. But unfortunately, here you're really leading the way, and we have to tip our hats to you. You're doing an amazing job, and we really hope that what you've shared with us today, and you've been so generous with your time, will inspire lots of people in Australia to finally get ourselves moving at this time. So a massive thank you to our speakers, also to Vic Health, and you know, well done to Vic Health. Thank you so much for coming on board. We've certainly seen the way people need to get their exercise changed significantly in Australia, and to recognise how important it is to get people both riding their bikes and walking just as part of their everyday life is something that we really appreciate Vic Health showing some great leadership there. So thank you to you. A big thank you to Anthea for hosting. She's done an amazing job. A lot of preparation obviously goes into that. We've only had a week to do it, so massive thank you to Anthea. Some of you have heard a thank you to Luke Poland. Luke Poland used to work with us. He now works in Sustrans. He's worked in government. He's seen lots of sides of this. He came to us with this idea only a little over a week ago. He was instrumental in putting it together. Luke's a terrific fella. He's a true believer. We know he's certainly always got our back. I know I think of a great time on an event once where I was giving a speech and Luke was hiding behind a pull-up banner, making sure it didn't fall and bang me on the head. He's that sort of guy. He'll do anything for the cause. So a massive thank you to you, Luke. The last one, of course, is to the audience, to everyone that's taken their time this evening, or if you are anywhere elsewhere in the world this morning, to join in. We need everyone we can to make a change here in Australia. All of you are an important part of that. We all need to come together and advocate together. So thank you also for the audience. You've been generous. So that's it from us. It's been a great evening and I really appreciate it. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. See ya.